In 1972, Francis Ford Coppola's mafia epic, The Godfather, was released. It broke box office records, won huge critical acclaim, and helped revive the ailing Hollywood studio system.
Godfather's become part of the popular culture now. It was more than just a movie.
It changed the way pictures looked. It changed the way pictures were cast. It was a seminal moment.
To this day, I don't know that anybody else has ever achieved it.
The Godfather launched the career of director Francis Ford Coppola and relaunched the flagging career of screen icon Marlon Brando, starring as the aging, brooding mafia don.
You don't even think to call me Godfather. Instead, you come into my house on the day my daughter's to be married and you ask me to do murder for money.
But the making of this gangster classic was more dramatic and brutal than the movie itself, sparking real-life mob violence across America. Bombarded by mass protests and a bitter campaign of intimidation, The Godfather was almost never made.
Bob Evans, the head of production for Paramount, was threatened, as was his wife, Ally McGraw.
When we kill a snake, we chop its head off first.
Those threats were real.
Even worse, a genuine mafia godfather vowed to stop the movie by any means necessary.
If he wanted to stop it, there was no way to shoot him.
I told Al it's a fucking disaster.
Left with no choice, Hollywood struck a historic deal with the mob. But as filming commenced, the streets of New York exploded into a fully fledged mafia war.
We were shooting a movie, and they were shooting it out on the streets of New York.
This is the untold story of The Godfather and the mob.
Without the mob being involved in making The Godfather, there'd be no Godfather.
The Godfather is the story of the Corleone mafia family and the corruption of its youngest son, Michael. He is sucked into a violent world where cold-blooded murder is an everyday occurrence. But The Godfather, the greatest mafia epic ever made, had an inauspicious start. In the mid-1960s, Mario Puzo, the man who would write The Godfather, was broke, reeling from the commercial failure of his first two novels.
It's a man who never had too much success in his life. He wrote a book called The Fortunate Pilgrim. It's a masterpiece.
We won a book club award. It was really a work of art, a real piece of literature. And 3 people read it in the whole world, you know.
Everyone who had read the book said, Mario, there's one character in that book you should expand and do another book on. And that was this Don in the book.
The Fortunate Pilgrim featured a cameo appearance from an aging mafia don. Puzo realized that this character could be the basis for the bestseller he so needed. The timing couldn't have been better. Real-life mafia godfathers such as Carlo Gambino had been thrust into the spotlight after a series of high-profile FBI investigations.
Such operations are tied in with prostitution, with narcotics, and with more violent forms of underworld criminal activities.
Puzo decided to exploit the public's newfound appetite for the mob. There was a hitch. He knew nothing about the mob. So he headed to Las Vegas, which by the late 1960s had become the mafia playground. In the Sands Casino, he met the man who gave him first-hand knowledge on the inner workings of the mafia, pit boss Ed Walters.
Mario Puzo was a little fat guy, used to come in the Sands and other hotels. He was a stone gambler, loved to gamble day and night. He'd spend hours there asking questions about Sinatra and the mob, and he knew very little about it. That's where Mario Puzo picked up all his research.
He used the stories that he'd heard and wove them into the Godfather story.
I don't think anybody expected it to be the success that it was.
It became a huge international hit.
In 1969, Puzo's new novel, The Godfather, was published. It became an instant bestseller, confirming the public's appetite for all things mafia. But despite the book's global success, Paramount Pictures, who had bought the film rights, vowed it would never make The Godfather into a movie.
Absolutely no one at the studio believed in the future of this picture.
This was a movie nobody had any faith in.
Paramount saw The Godfather as too great a financial risk. Like the other Hollywood studios, it was in dire straits, reeling from the loss of cinema audiences to television.
Clearly the audience had changed substantially, but no one could figure out what the new audience was.
On top of this, Paramount was still recovering from the high-profile box office disaster of another mafia movie.
Paramount had just come out with a dreadful picture called The Brotherhood, starring Kirk Douglas, which was a disaster.
They determined from that nobody wanted to see the Mafia.
They sat on this book until we got involved in it for over 1 year.
During that year, Puzo's book sold in its millions. Paramount knew it had to make The Godfather, but wanted to minimize the risk.
What Paramount really wanted to do was capitalize on the name of the book, The Godfather, based on the name value of this mega best-selling book without spending a lot of money on it.
They were going to spend somewhere around $2.5–3 million to make the film, and they were going to use all people who really needed work.
Paramount began to assemble its low-budget dream team. Loitering on the back lot was Al Ruddy, an up-and-coming young producer.
I had just done another movie at Paramount. It was one of the few movies that came in under budget and ahead of schedule.
This was just unheard of at Paramount. No one came in on budget.
With their minuscule budget in safe hands, Paramount and Ruddy then approached a young director. Francis Ford Coppola had all the qualities they were looking for.
There was one important reason why he should do the picture, namely, he was broke.
Frankly, I believe they hired him because he was cheap.
He was born to do the movie. There's nobody else who could have done that movie.
In 1970, Paramount announced that Puzo's The Godfather was finally to be made into a movie. They had no idea how traumatic the next 2 years would be. News of the film would enrage a powerful civil rights organization run by a real-life mafia godfather. He would vow to stop the film by any means necessary.
He wanted to stop it. There was no way of shooting. They wouldn't get any cooperation.
Hollywood and the mafia would do battle on the streets of New York. In 1970, ailing Paramount Pictures put The Godfather into production. It would become a gangster classic, but Paramount saw it simply as a way to cash in on Mario Puzo's best-selling book.
It was done for under $6 million, which in those days, they were doing movies for $20–25 million at Paramount.
Restricted by a tiny budget, Paramount wanted to update Puzo's 1940s story of a New York mafia empire to the present day.
The setting for the film was going to be translated to the early 1970s, and they were going to shoot it either on studio sets, which would have been terrible, or in a city other than New York, because shooting in New York is always more expensive and more problematic than shooting anywhere else.
But director Francis Ford Coppola was determined to preserve the authenticity of Puzo's classic novel and wanted to shoot in the heartland of the Italian-American mafia.
Francis Coppola absolutely wanted to shoot the movie in New York City, and Al Ruddy wanted to shoot it there too. There was no question it would be better shooting it there than elsewhere.
There's no place else that you could get that kind of authenticity.
Paramount finally relented, but by deciding to shoot in New York, they were about to face fierce hostility from a hugely powerful organization with mafia connections.
We are righteous, we represent good, we are good, we do good, and we're gonna force you to do good.
By the time The Godfather was in production, a newly established New York organization, the Italian-American Civil Rights League, was gaining influence, boasting celebrities, politicians, and the clergy among its supporters.
The membership grew in a space of a little over 2 years to 100,000 members, and that's not an exaggeration.
The League's mission was to challenge the stereotype that all